be very prescient, shall we say. So I'm just going to very quickly sketch out the programme. On the menu for this evening, we're going to kick off with a few words from Michael Edwards and Richard Lee from Just Space. And then we'll get into a bit of the detail with some contributions from 5 of the 7 case studies in the book, before hopefully turning to Sarah Sackman. I can see Sarah's now just arrived, who will be bringing something of a legal perspective explored towards the latter stages of the book. And then finally sweeping up some words from Pablo and Daniel, with about 30 minutes or so for questions. So a good amount of time for discussion afterwards. Just a very quick few notes. Please just do bear with any technological difficulties. As you can all imagine, we're all sort of learning the technology. And I think for many of us, this is our first time actually doing a seminar webinar style like this. So it will have its challenges, and I know that there are a few connection issues. So please do just bear with that. For the contributors, just to reiterate, if you could just keep your camera and your microphone off until you're called to speak. And for the audience, if I could request that you send in your questions as we go through. For those of you joining by Zoom, there is actually a Q&A box, shall we say, a Q&A slot for you to put into your questions. So I can gather those questions up. Vicky and myself will gather those questions up as we go along, and we'll get onto those right at the end. For those of you who are not academics or you know, within sort of the field of urban planning, apologies in advance for any technical jargon. I think we're going to try and avoid the jargon as much as possible this evening, but don't be put off by it if we do lapse into it a little bit. So to kick us off then, and to give us a little bit of foregrounding, I'm going to call on Michael Edwards, who is Honorary Professor at the Bartlett School of Planning, and I'm sure well known to a lot of you for his community work and his involvement with Just Space. Followed by Richard Lee, who's going to say hopefully a few words about the Just Space network and some of the work that they've been doing and their input into this present work. Okay, so Michael, please.
I think you have to allow me to put the video on. Yeah. There. Okay. Good. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you, Michael.
Okay, fine. Well, thank you for the introduction, Iqbal. As you say, my name is Michael Edwards. I've been teaching planning at the Bartlett School of Planning for 50 years or something. I'm therefore semi-retired. But for the last 10 or 15 years, I've been very much involved in Just Space, which is a network of community organizations in London which came together essentially in response to the setting up of a new government structure for London, with the elected Mayor of London and the Assembly and a new authority called the GLA, Greater London Authority. London has a fantastically strong, honourable tradition of community and activist groups being pretty well organised and very effective sometimes in really changing the world. Often ineffective, often overwhelmed by the very powerful forces of business and landed property and finance, but sometimes victorious. But in the early years of this century, it was necessary really to try and scale up the activities of community groups in London to confront the citywide, London-wide challenges of having a metropolitan planning authority. So that's how Just Space came to be formed. The history is quite well written up, and if you go to the website of Just Space, you will find a publication section which really has a lot of online and book type history and analysis, because Just Space is quite a distinctive and world famous organization. But the way it works is through the collaboration of community groups, which themselves operate at lots of different scales. Some of them at a very local scale of a single housing estate or a single neighborhood, like most of the people who are represented here today. Some of them London-wide groups active across the whole metropolis, or indeed nationally, like Friends of the Earth. And the main challenge facing Just Space is linking up these different levels of activity, which we sometimes manage to do better, sometimes not so well. But one of the really crucial things in it is having these stories told. And that's the great thing about this book, which makes me welcome it so much. We've told other stories before about estates and what happens on them and what has happened on them, particularly publishing important publications which help tenants on estates, residents defend themselves. But this book takes the whole thing a great step further and is going to be very, very valuable in spreading these words. And I'll hand over to Richard now, but I'll just say that in this extraordinary world that we are in now with the COVID virus epidemic and the government's extraordinary response to it, with deaths running at an appalling level, we are really seeing the downside of the way London housing and planning works, the way in which its negative impacts hit so badly people in the bottom half of the income distribution, if you like. So it really heightens the need for the future to be very different from the past. And this book's going to be a great help, I think, in that. Thank you. Richard.
Okay, I hope I'm audible and visible.
Not visible
So
yet. We can hear you, but we cannot see you yet.
Oh, okay.
You have to switch on your video. Yeah,
Yes.
we can see you now. Yeah, great.
Is that a bit better? Okay, so thank you. I'm Richard Lee from Just Space. I'm also a council tenant in the London Borough of Southwark. And we're going to hear today about some estates across London where people have creatively brought forward community-led regeneration, or a vision for community-led regeneration. But this is in a context where, at the moment across London, 57 council estates are under threat of demolition. And this is an underestimate. And it also comes on top of 161 of the larger council estates that have been already demolished since 1997. We estimate that this equates to 130,000 people who've been displaced already, and that doesn't account, obviously, for the 57 that are under threat. And all this comes despite Mayor of London Sadiq Khan's guidance, which is supposed to require that demolition is a last resort, and that the residents of an estate threatened with demolition should be able to have a ballot. So Just Space, together with the London Tenants Federation, to shine a light on this, are about to launch a website which will document the 57 council estates under threat, and will also provide a handbook of rights for tenants and residents in how they can try and resist this demolition and displacement. It's called Estate Watch London, a resource for London's communities facing regeneration, and which will be online from mid-June, so you won't be able to access it until mid-June. So finally, just to say that the 57 the 57 council estates whose stories are being heard from this new website that we're launching very much needs the support of those who are attending this meeting.
Apologies, I had to just unmute myself. Richard and Michael, thank you very much indeed for providing that overall sort of synopsis, really painting the scale of the task ahead. And as you both said, the website is about stories, and I think we're going to move on and hear now a few of those stories. So if I can ask just in a moment for Galinda from Gressingham to unmute and to tell us a little bit about her case study, the Gressingham estate.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, fantastic. This is called dual purposing here. I'm coming in on audio, but trying to do the online as well. So I don't know how much people know about Gressingham, but we are an estate of around 300 homes just outside of Brixton on the Brockwell Park. And we have now been fighting estate regeneration or demolition for, oh sorry, apologies, I do have a little one here. So Mama's on the phone, Peter. Come here, do you want to come? Sorry, apologies about this. Come in. So we have now been, I think, about 8 years in this battle. Peter, come here, do you want to come? Sorry about this. Okay. Just come here, Peter. Okay, can you give me? Iqbal, do you want to just talk for 2 minutes? I just need to deal with my little one. She's getting upset at the moment.
Okay, no problem at all.
I need to just change the TV channel.
Okay, no worries. I tell you, Linda, Galinda, what we'll do is we'll actually maybe swap over and we'll get Linda on now and put you on in 5 minutes if that's okay.
Okay, thanks. Sorry about this.
No problem at all.
Multitasking at this time. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so Linda, slightly earlier than scheduled. I hope you're ready to go there. And if we could hear a little bit about the West Ken Gibbs Green estate from you.
Thank you, Iqbal. Firstly, I'd like to say congratulations to Pablo and Daniel. It's clearly a thoroughly investigated and, from a personal point of view, a very accurate account of what happened to us on the estate as at that point. I'm very happy to have been invited to this launch. We can't ignore that we're all living in extraordinary times, and to be honest, we can't be sure what tomorrow looks like in any aspect of our lives at the moment. The great fear is that the poor will become poorer and ever more real. That seems to be. But in any community, in any part of the world, our home is a basic need for safety and comfort, and that's what we're all about. I think, though we may not have ordinarily planned it this way, it's actually lovely for this meeting to be able to sit in my home, the one that is part of an estate that we've campaigned so long to keep, and it kind of adds a touch of reality, I'd say. My family have helped me out enormously with my lack of techno understanding, but I'm hoping that you're going to enjoy lots of pictures of our estate whilst I blabber on about what's going on. So let's see if this works. Okay, and then what? No, that's not the one. Okay, not sure how to make it bigger than that. I'll go on. Here in West Kensington and Gibbs Green, we connect obvious factors that all the 7 campaigns captured in Pablo and Daniel's study have in common. We're diverse, we were bullied, we have fought against all odds to retain and regain our homes. We've learned that sticking together and knowing that together we're strong has been imperative. We know how to boost one another at low moments and disappointments, We've learned to share ideas and basically just get stuck in. And there is a difference, but I'll get to that. I've personally been a resident on the West Ken estate for 20 years. Over half of that I've spent on the 11-year-old campaign up until today. It was that far back that the then Tory council sold us. We are 2 estates, West Kensington and Gibbs Green. You could be mistaken for thinking that we're one estate as our borders are invisible. Geographically and socially, we fit together as one, and the communities see no gap. As part of our perimeter wall that divides us from the internationally famous Earls Court exhibition centres, it was when the lease ran out, criminally and literally, the 2 huge sheds, as they were called, were sold, and in with the deal went us. 760 homes. Sorry, just a minute. I need to know how to make it the picture bigger. I want that to be full screen. Or is it that cut thing? Got it. I'm on. Right, we're nice. 760 homes we are on the 2 estates, from single person flats to masonettes to 4-bedroom houses, young people, old people, homes of growing families, tenants, subtenants, leaseholders, freeholders, the complete range. This was a Tory council doing what they do best, looking out for money over above the people. A change of leadership in Hammersmith and Fulham Council, our local council, was a massive turning point. And as I explained to my growing up children at the time, because they are the opposition, they had to fight for the opposite of the sale and get the estates back. And the difference, as I mentioned, is that I know many of you start with a Labour council. The campaign and is led by my neighbours with justice at the fore. We were introduced to Jonathan Rosenberg, who doubtlessly will be recorded in history books as the expert who taught us how to battle. He reached out and introduced us to the press, lawyers, politicians, universities and other estates facing similar threats. As a campaign, we were the ones to throw in a lot of spanners in the works over the years. Protests, peaceful ones, obviously, like when we opposed the developers' proposal to close our local pub for demolition. We had a Victorian dress-up day and we took a promenade around the area. And we've also pulled off a few stunts like letter writing, gives power to the pen, but emailing probably more effective, thankfully. And visiting the developer's own backyard, but please look that one up on the website. Actions like this led to delays in the developers reimagining our area. Cheek, the developers reimagined our area, which means that it's their speak for start again, get those people out of the way, and invite of people with money to live and enjoy the area. Also along our campaign trail, Brexit helped, if you know what I mean. A change in City Hall along our journey was helpful. And basically selling luxury flats at one point just became harder to do. So as a campaign and as West Ken and Gibbs Green community homes, the aim has always been for community ownership. I'm totally for community ownership. Has anyone here visited Wetch? I suppose I won't get an answer on that. I know many of you have. Wouldn't you want what they've got? Well, I do. However, our first submission for the right to transfer was rejected along the route of going for self-control. It took 4 years to be notified to us. I guess no one really knew what to do with it. What a downer that was to receive that letter. So we had to decide what would happen if we tried again. When should we do that? Would that be our only and last chance to dream the dream? Meanwhile, it was finally the Labour Council who played a blinder back last autumn. As the developers had had enough, well, maybe we had something to do with that, they split their business interests and sold the development scheme to a new developer. In the transaction, the council bought back the estates. Fabulous. So I should mention here that it has been to our advantage to work with the council in Hammersmith and Fulham. Well, as you can imagine, the estates are back. Party, press, interviews, yippee, it's all over. My neighbours could put off, who'd been putting off replacing the hall carpet for so long or changing the curtains in case they didn't fit in the new home. They started to do their little DIY things. But I was going, hey guys, what about the right to transfer? There was a point at which momentum was lost. So we did what we like doing. We had another meeting and neighbours voted to go for it. We submitted, well, that should be resubmitted. That was in March. That's right now. Within weeks, this time, weeks, we had a response. And like Jonathan's already burst my bubble, the second submission of the right to transfer has been accepted. In my day-to-day language, I shared with my 3 somethings who I live with at this stage that it was a bit like being in the Olympic Games changing rooms. We've got our kit on, but at least now we're on the track. However, the time we're striving in right now for our campaign's point of view is frustrating in that, as is convenient, certain aspects of steps to go forward are moving at a pace somewhere between slow and stopped. But what can we do? Well, fail to plan is plan to fail. In the meantime, we're working with the fabulous Create Streets, as Pablo and Daniel's book covers. We neighbours looked at doing our own bit of reimagining of our estates and we set about the people's plan. Then about 18 months ago, we linked up with Create Streets to get on with it. Meetings, of course. But now we've drawn up plans and pictures of what our new community hall and new flats would look like. There would have been a nice tiny picture. I realise I haven't been going through the slides. Never mind. So what else have we used to get to the point where we are now? We've made a film with Banyak, which has been edited several times to appeal to varying audiences. And we were to be on the stage this autumn. Playwright Aleki Blythe recorded our voices over the years at different milestones to create a play. But obviously I don't know now what will happen to that after all. It is my personal dream to use Wetch's template for our own estate-led community. Obviously, I've looked back in Wetch's timeline to see at what point we are where they were once. And amusingly, I came across some film footage. No, not of Jonathan with dark hair and half the size he is now. I watched an elderly resident at Wetch. He was on the film and he said, well, yes, there is an issue. And I thought, yeah, well, I knew there would have to be. And what did he say? We can't put up a perimeter wall. Bless him. So on that, I'd like to thank everybody who's shown an interest in our campaign. That's as far as we are right now. Your book, Pablo and Daniel, keeps us in the pages of modern history, and we hope it inspires other communities to hope and fight and keep their homes. Overwhelmingly, we at West Ken and Gibbs Green owe our success to Jonathan Rosenberg, without whom we may well have been uprooted and scattered, living in different parts of London or even the country, and maybe dealing with the turning point of a promised 2-year freeze on rents that could have blown up out of all affordability. So I'll end by thanking him, and I'd like you to know that not all superheroes wear their pants outside their tights.
Linda, thank you very much indeed. Just so everybody knows, we will be hearing from Jonathan Rosenberg in a little while. So thank you very much indeed for that. A very powerful story, something of a roller coaster ride as well. Of course, a story that's still unfolding. I should also just apologise for the slightly patchy quality of sound quality that some of you are experiencing. I think we've just had a comment from Liam. So apologies if it's been a little bit patchy. I'm afraid to say, I think internet usage is pretty high at the moment. So we are going to be slightly dogged this evening, I'm afraid. Could I also just say, do keep your questions coming in as well, and we can scoop those up at the end and have half an hour or so of discussion. So I'm going to just ask now if Galinda is ready to rejoin us. I can see that she's, I think, primed and ready to go. So we'll try to connect again with Galinda and to hear the story of Cressingham.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I think we've solved the Paw Patrol problem. So if anyone has kids, you probably understand the demand for Paw Patrol. Anyway, just going back, Cressing Gardens with 300 homes, just outside of Brixton, Telltale right on Brockwell Park. We have been, I think, fighting this estate regeneration demolition now for, I think we're getting up to our 8th year of anniversary.
And I think Galinda, we cannot see your image. I don't know if...
Oh, my internet is so poor. I'm going in and out. So
okay, that's fine.
It's trying to reconnect, but we shall see. But that does bring up an important bit. We are at the moment, the council has decided it wants to start get a toehold into one end of the estate, and has got its 100% owned subsidiary structure to do some quite, I would say, in my opinion, very ugly designs for one of the blocks. And they were supposed to have a public exhibition, and because of the coronavirus, they eventually had to cancel it. But it wasn't as a consequence of all the complaints coming in from residents. It ended up because one of their own officers was exhibiting symptoms of coronavirus. So when it affects them, they will act, but not when the residents start to complain. But nevertheless, they have now decided to do a fully digital online Q&A session. And as my own internet is exhibiting tonight, it's almost impossible to participate in a digital consultation. But because it is a council-owned subsidiary, they seem to be getting away with it. But anyway, that's one of the many, many hurdles that we are dealing with. But going back 8 years, I think one of the key things was always right at the beginning is keeping the community together. And at Cressingham Gardens, we are very, very clear. It's all about residents. And we were very clear on the terminology that we would use. So we talk about residents. The only time we talk about legal tenures is when it actually is a matter that affects different tenures. Otherwise, everyone on the Cressingham Gardens, regardless of tenure, has equal say, in our opinion. And we have quite a complexity here. So we have obviously council tenants, I should say secure tenants, we have leaseholders, we have freeholders who pay service charges, freeholders who don't pay service charges, we have housing association tenants, private rental tenants, and what else we have? We've got temporary accommodation and property guardians now. So welcome to the world of highly complex legal issues. However, saying that, it does mean that we can fight using different rights. And I think that's one element that we've very early recognized, that even though we're all residents, different individuals by law have different rights which are stronger or weaker. And whenever we have to fight a specific issue, we always look at who's got the strongest legal rights and we fight through that route. And so basically it's about building, saying it's one community, we all, one for all and all for one, as you would, the old saying. And it continues today. The journey has been a long one, it's a marathon. Some of the big highlights is when we decided to do our own people's plan. It was a massive effort. I think it would end up being a 200, 300 page report as an alternative to full demolition. And we had the support of various experts, architects, quantity surveyors, to do a fully priced out option, and also looked at different financing models. And just an example of how hard it is to deal with the Lambeth Council, which is a Labour one, I should note, which is horrifying the residents. They can't believe their Labour Council would do this. We submitted the alternative people's plan on Friday, 5 p.m., and the officers already dismissed it on the Monday. However, saying that, we continue to fight in the sense that we've done 2 judicial reviews. We won the first one, which even shocked us. And sadly, we lost the second one, but it also, one, it's set principles. We also, in the second one, even though we lost, we won some of the points, gained some extra rights back. But it also managed to slow down the process, because going through this, it is about us learning as well, because none of us have done this before. And we're obviously up against people who get paid full-time to do this as their career, whilst we're trying to carve out our own personal time, catch up and learn new things all the time. One of the things we did start very early on, it also was, we went down the path of looking at the tenant empowerment options. One of them was, obviously, there's the right to manage. Now, these are secure council tenants, which are rights, which are amazing rights they have. One is the right to manage, and the other one is the right to transfer. We managed to get some funding from central government to get an advisor in to explore the options initially. We then decided we wanted to serve notice for both of them, which was quite funny, because the advisor and central government kept saying, you can't serve notice on both, you have to choose one or the other. And we said, but where in the law does it say we have to choose one or the other? As a consequence, we served notice on both. I think to this day, I'm actually appreciative that we did serve notice on both. The right to manage is actually going ahead. We're doing this because we want to stop the downgrading of the repairs and maintenance. So one of the issues a lot of these estates, the council starts to do really poor repairs and maintenance. Now, land-based repairs and maintenance are bad even for a normal level. When you're on estate regeneration, it gets even to another extreme. Just to give an example, we had one home, they were putting a mother and a son into it. There was one of the windows was leaking, and the contractor came out and said, well, I understand you're being demolished sometime in the future, so we're going to nail shut your windows rather than repair them. Being UPVC windows, he basically damaged the windows beyond repair. And that's the issues that we're fighting with. But how, basically, I don't understand how they can basically now shut people's windows with people still living in them, thus reducing ventilation, but they seem to get away with this. So we're doing the right to manage. We have successfully set up a legal entity. We have our first employee, the Director of Estate Services, and we are finalising the management agreement with the council. And obviously that's been slowed down now because of coronavirus, but hopefully within a year or so we will be taking over the next first services, so repairs, maintenance, cleaning, gardening. In parallel, we, as I mentioned, serve notice on the right to transfer, and this we submitted under the law. The council has a right to object on regeneration grounds, which they didn't on the right to manage. And as a consequence, it went to the Secretary of State for mediation, or determination, I should say. We waited patiently 3 years, but last year we were rewarded, and we were given the green light to go ahead by the Secretary of State to move forward with the right to transfer. So we are now at the stage of looking at the feasibility study, and we're just getting our feet on the ground to move forward on that one. So from a Cressingham perspective, it is like a massive marathon, and it's amazing where you start putting things in motion and you have no idea how long, you know it's going to take years, but you start them because there's like the backup plans of backup plans of backup plans. And, you know, a lot of them are coming to fruition now. And who would have thought we would still be here fully standing 8 years later? Because when they started they had the very first exhibition in September 2012, and they had wanted to start demolition by March 2013. But 2020, we are still standing. But that's just a few of the highlights on Cressingham, and so the big ones. And along the way, we have we actually laugh a lot, actually, and do a lot of quirky projects. So the latest one is we're doing tree hugging. So with the tree hugging project, oh yes, Keita. Sorry, that's just a little one. The tree hugging project is we're getting residents to go around, basically measuring the girth or circumference of the tree, so we can then calculate the age, so that we can fight back with regards to the removal of the trees, but also helps for us to appreciate what we actually have here, because Cressingham was basically designed with a view of it kept all the original trees in situ, and then it broke the design to actually fit around the trees. So it is quite a unique design. And if anyone would like to come, subject to coronavirus, obviously, we have done a London Open House weekend, the architecture weekend, every year, I think for the last 7-8 years, in September. So we hopefully will be doing London Open House, and we'll happily welcome you and take you on a tour around the estate. Thanks.
Galinda, thank you very much indeed for that. You called it a marathon. I would suggest it was something like a street fighting marathon to start with. You know, trying to resist these
guerrilla warfare
attempts. Yeah, absolutely, guerrilla warfare, precisely. But I think also a case study of a really well organised campaign. I think there's probably a lot of lessons to be pulled out there. But congratulations for getting where you have with the right to manage, and then the right to transfer, hopefully coming up. So let's now turn hopefully to Saskia from Focus East 15. I've seen Saskia on the list. Saskia, if I can just ask you to please switch your video on and your microphone, and I can just see you there. So I'm going to.
Hi.
Hi there. Right. So the floor is yours, Saskia.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And just to echo, like, we are really happy and proud to be featured in your book. That's fantastic, and it's great to have a piece of what's going to be history of some really great campaigns and lessons from them. So thank you very much. So I'm from Focus E15 Housing Campaign. We started in 2013, so we're almost 7 years old. And in the broadest possible sense, we fight for housing in Newham and East London. Newham has got the worst rate of homelessness in the country. People may also know that in terms of coronavirus, Newham has the worst death rate in the country as well. It's also the borough that held the Olympics. So it's quite a contentious and important borough in the fight for housing. Focus E15 campaign, we started when a group of young mothers said that they were refusing to leave East London and Newham and that they will not move to Birmingham, Manchester and Hastings. And so the campaign started around the message of no to social cleansing. But really in the past 7 years, it's become as broad as it needed to be. We tackle the fight against temporary accommodation, shoddy temporary accommodation, against the use of intentional homelessness by councils to send people out of London. We also demand, of course, that empty homes are opened, and a fact that we always like to talk about is there are double the amount of empty homes in this country as there are homeless people, and that's really important, and it's especially important when we fight for an estate that's local in Newham, which is the Carpenter's estate, which the towers of which still remain empty. Our campaign is quite well known for an occupation that we held on that estate in 2014 to demonstrate that actually so many homes are left empty, and we need to put people into those homes. So that's like a very broad overview of the campaign. We've got lots of stuff online if you want to check it out. But really what I wanted to use this moment to speak about, because it's fantastic to be able to look at the campaigns and think, oh, what lessons can we learn? I want to echo what's been said already about standing together. It's a simple thing, but it's very, very important. I also want to echo what was just said about having a laugh and having fun, because, you know, like, I don't think any of us would be here 7 years later if we weren't having a laugh while we were fighting for housing, and that's definite. But some other things that I wanted to draw out from our experience of campaigning. Our slogan, if we have a slogan, is educate, agitate, organise. And we do that. We have educational meetings. Well, during coronavirus, we have them every week. We have speakers from Cressingham Gardens. We've had speakers from Mums for Housing in Oakland, California, from housing campaigns in Palestine, from housing and academics from Colombia to Cuba. And really, we're very keen on making sure that we're educated about international housing struggles and also housing struggles of the past. So we look to the East London Federation of Suffragettes. A really important thing in our campaign is that we've never aligned ourselves with a political party. And we've done that so that we can basically openly be able to fight and criticise any of our councils to do better, because none of the councils are doing enough in any way, shape and form. In Newham, we've had a Labour council the entirety of the campaign and for many, many years. And even though they're held up as one of the most progressive Labour councils now, it's laughable, the lack of action on housing and even to open up empty homes. Another key point of our campaign that's been quite significant is that we've never had any paid campaigners, and we've discussed that as a choice, that any money that we get as a campaign, we've used it to basically make campaigning accessible. So that means pay for childminders, pay for transport to the campaign, basic things like this. And actually that's been quite an important aspect of our campaign in, what's the words? I don't know the words. And making sure that everyone kind of pulls their weight and we're on equal footing together and that nobody is held above anybody else. Of course, we value direct action all the time. We certainly started off our campaign by saying that we don't care about being respectable. We care about fighting for housing and demanding that housing is opened. And I don't know if I'm able to share my screen for a second, if that's okay, because I can. Is that all right? Can I share my screen? Iqbal?
Absolutely, go for it.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to show you one action that happened just the other day. We done a call out with Mums for Housing in Oakland, California, who've been doing amazing housing work there, to basically make banners and hang banners out and do this and that. But one of our main campaigners, Marsha, done the most fantastic banner in her temporary accommodation, which is called Brimstone House, which was previously called Focus E15 Hostel. And I'm going to show you, that banner right now. And you'll see that what it says is forced to isolate in one room with children while 400 flats lay empty, open empty homes, open the Carpenter's estate. And I think this is like one example basically of the fight that we're having right now, which after 7 years is not stopping in any way. In fact, it's getting busier, but that's okay. So yeah, I think maybe I'll stop there, and I'd love to participate in a discussion, but thank you very much.
Saskia, thank you very much indeed. That's quite a powerful note, I think, to finish on there, you know, really sort of showing you know, the disparity of things at the moment. Yeah, so thank you very much for sharing your screen. And also for describing a very rich and sociable journey that you've been on at E15. And again, you know, a lot to learn there, and perhaps a lot to discuss at the end. So moving on, if I can now turn to Jonathan Rosenberg, who's been mentioned a couple of times already. Jonathan, are you there? And if so, if you can just switch on your camera,
hello,
and your microphone, and just tell us a little bit then about this excellent story from West Ken and Gibbs Green.
Oh, well, Linda's done very well on that. I think the crucial thing is that we finally defeated the redevelopment demolition scheme in November of 2019, and it was a complete and utter defeat. Now, it took 10 years. Well, we were in year 11 when that was achieved. It took, I think, 10 and a half years, sorry to be precise, to achieve that. And it was a tremendous relief, as Linda has reflected, for the residents to be freed of that awful thing hanging over them. I mean, imagine, I mean, you know, oh, should I fix the hall room carpet? Should I paint? Should I do this? Should I? And not just 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, but 11 years. I mean, after a while, it's like, where does this go? So that was a tremendous relief. Now, the other thing is that we got into terrible trouble with, as we knew we would, because of the ridiculous nature of the regulations for the right to transfer, on the actual interpretation of what it means, how it works, and what's a tenant, and all this nonsense. And in the same moment that Gerlinda from Cressingham was told by the housing minister that she could proceed, we were told that we couldn't. And it all came down to the most extraordinary, esoteric, illegal, I don't know, thing about what the definition of what is a tenant. And I mean, honestly, you end up back in the Middle Ages when you want to answer a question like that. And it is fascinating, as we've discovered. But the upshot of it all is Gerlinda got the go-ahead. West Ken Gibbs Green got knocked out on this weird technicality. And it took us 9 whole months and about, I don't know, it cost about 40 or 50,000 pounds, you've got to laugh, to fix it. And we're now back to exactly the same position now that Gerlinda of Cressingham is in, which is we're into the feasibility study stage, which is of course absolutely critical because this is where we work out the mechanics and the money and the, you know, the amounts, what it will cost and how it can be done, what sort of offer can be made to the residents if we're going to move into community ownership and so on, and what sort of ambitions have we got for community-led regeneration and so on. So I really, you know, I think I've said enough about West Ken Gibbs Green, except just to say that, you know, in the end, we have, over a period of something like 11 years, with, you know, one overwhelming proof after another, shown that the majority of residents are in favour of community ownership and being in charge of their own futures. Now, Iqbal, can I move on to something else now?
Yeah, please do. I didn't want you to just focus entirely on West Ken and Gibbs Green. If you can just maybe if you want to say a few words more about Walterton and Elgin community homes, perhaps.
I'll say a few words about Walterton and Elgin, and then there's something I want to talk about, which is a fairly extraordinary development, which I'm sure everybody will be excited to hear about. So just firstly on Walterton and Elgin, this 17, you know, Walterton and Elgin, obviously when we took over, we had to demolish 2 asbestos-ridden 22-storey tower blocks, and you know, then we had to go up and refurbish 200 Victorian houses and stuff. So it's not like we haven't had experience of, you know, multi-million pound development and redevelopment schemes. But the scheme that we devised for it to intensify and improve the Elgin estate has proved challenging. And it's taken, we're now in year 3 rather than year 2 and all this, and it's been, well, one thing after another, and it's been very interesting, and we're still going, and we are getting there, but as you can imagine now, we've had to contend with the virus on top of everything else. However, what we set out to achieve was extraordinarily complex. I think that it took us quite some time to appreciate how challenging and complicated our ambition for the Elgin estate was, because it's not just adding 43 new homes, all of which are for social rent. It's not just having 140 kilowatts capacity of solar panels, which right this moment are generating huge amounts of electricity to power our office, not that there's anybody in there, of course, and feed into the national grid. But then we built 360 square meters of so-called, you know, open terraces, which can be used by residents to improve their well-being and for other projects involving the improvement of the environment. There have been a range of improvements across the board, and it's been a very, very comprehensive scheme involving new development, extra floors, infill development and conversion, and everybody, despite the challenges, you know, has, I think, tried their hardest, even though it has been very difficult. And I have to say, we have discovered, like everybody else, that the contractual environment for major projects is broken, and that the so-called design and build thing is a myth, and that in the end you cannot privatize risk. So, you know, we're not the first people to discover that one by any means. So that's all coming along, and we're very proud of it. The other thing I want to say about Walterton and Elgin is that for the last 3 years, at each annual general meeting, there have been 150 people present in the room. Now, 120 of those have been, or thereabouts, have been residents of Walterton and Elgin. And when we do the statistics, which we do every year at a very detailed level, it demonstrates that about 20% of residents of all households on the Walterton and Elgin estates, regardless of whether they're members or not, were present at the annual general meeting, where an account was given of the organisation's activities, and where the members had an opportunity to vote for their neighbours, to be elected onto the board to govern the affairs of their own landlord. And that is reflected in the video, which if people want to have a look, we've got an 11-minute video on the WETCH website, which explains really what the ethos and the way WETCH works is all about. And let's face it, it's pretty simple and pretty basic. So Iqbal, is it all right if because I want to move on to something more, much broader and more strategic. Would that be all right with you now?
Yeah, if you could just maybe contain it to a couple of minutes, if that's possible, Jonathan.
Yes, that's no problem at all. Now, something quite extraordinary happened at the tail end of last year, amidst an enormous amount of excitement and fireworks and all the rest of it, politically and otherwise, which was the culmination of a strand of work which I've been leading on, and which a number of other people, too numerous to mention, and they know who they are, have been very helpful in supporting me on. And I want to read you a statement now, and almost rhetorically ask who said that. So I'm going to read it now, which is, "We will support communities living on council estates who want to take ownership of the land and buildings they live in." And I would rhetorically ask, who said that? No, Iqbal, I don't know whether you've got an answer.
Oh, let me guess. Maybe a member of the current ruling party?
Oh, you're getting close. Yes, it was, in fact, on page 31, at the bottom of page 31 of the Conservative and Unionist Party manifesto, published in November 2019 for the December 2019 general election. So that is government policy, which is to support communities living on council estates who want to take ownership of the land and buildings they live in. In other words, the ruling party in government supports community ownership for council estate communities. Now, obviously, we're very pleased about that. A lot of people are very pleased about it. It's not something that I've publicised or others have publicised because, as you can imagine, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to put in the support framework for the government to help them to implement what is now their own policy. It's been an extraordinary journey, I would say that. And I would also thank UCL for being part of that journey, absolutely. Because, of course, in the course of that journey, we have naturally engaged with all of the other parties, or the main parties, who you know, I'm not complaining about them, but in the end, it was the Conservative Party in government that has adopted the policy. And so I think there's a tremendous opportunity has opened up here for all of these council estates who do feel oppressed and who do want to be liberated into community ownership, which is to seize the day and to help the government to implement its own policy by volunteering to go into community ownership. Iqbal, I've finished.
Jonathan, thank you very much indeed for that. That's laying down the gauntlet for us all, and perhaps we'll come back to that point. So, and indeed, a number of the points that you made at the end, Jonathan. Thank you very much indeed. And we're now going to turn to final story, if you like, from the community groups. So we're going to turn to Alexandra Road and Ainsworth Estate, and Elizabeth, who I saw earlier. Yes, I can see you now. If you can tell us a little bit about your story, please.
Sure, yeah. My name's Elizabeth Knowles, and this is a story of how our lovely 4.5 acre Alexandra Road Park in the centre of the Alexandra and Ainsworth Estate was restored 5 years ago. I've lived on Rowley Way, which is part of Alexandra and Ainsworth Estate, for the past 40 years, actually since it was built. So, long-standing resident. The park was restored with the help of a Heritage Lottery Fund grant in conjunction with Camden Council, and it was a community initiative, and Camden Council provided match funding for it. The park was a mess, neglected and wild, and although still very beautiful in its own way, nobody much could use it. All the equipment had been taken out of the little playgrounds, and the planting had really just taken over. This happened after 12 years of neglect, because when the estate became a management cooperative, the park actually was forgotten in the arrangements of management and maintenance of it. So in about 2011-12, 4 of us decided to try and do something about this. And we got together and applied for a Parks for People Heritage Lottery grant. At that time, both Neve Brown and the architect Janet Jack were still alive, but have sadly since died. They were both very skeptical about how it would work, if we could get it at all. And the reason for that was there had been a few tries before and that had failed. And Janet especially was very depressed about it. She used to say that she didn't come to the park anymore because it was so sad and it was just awful for her. But anyway, we applied for Heritage Lottery funding, and that was quite an ordeal, as anyone who's done it knows. But we got first pass funding, which we were so excited about. We just couldn't believe it. And so I had to ring up Neve Brown and told him that we got this first pass funding to restore the park. But there was a stony silence, and he said, and I said to him, "You sound surprised." And he said, "Surprised? I didn't think you had a hope in hell." So that was that. Anyway, this first pass funding, it enabled us to employ, with the help of the Camden people, who I have to say were really good. We employed a project manager, Sue Morgan, of Around the Block, and then some absolutely great landscape architects, J&L Gibbons, and Erect Architecture, who designed the play equipment to put in the little playgrounds. I'm going quickly because I knew I only had 5 minutes, but I can tell everybody it wasn't an easy process. We had lots of hurdles to jump, and the Heritage Lottery Fund don't give their money away. We had lots of communication, obviously, with everybody. We had special days for the kids to come and look at models. We used to go to Janet Jack's house even to get her take on everything. But anyway, everything came together, and the work started. Once the work started, it was really swift. And in 2015, we had a wonderful opening party in the park. The park has been used constantly ever since, and especially at the moment. In fact, people from outside have discovered our park, and now we have tennis balls all over the place. And in actual fact, we did a litter pick the other day, and I found 2 bottles of champagne in the rubbish, which is very unusual. But anyway, it's really, really used well, and everyone is appreciating it, like I say, especially at the moment. The management and maintenance of it were kind of built into the structure and are a requisite of the Heritage Lottery funding. We have to keep it up. And I have to say that it requires constant attention to keep it going. So very briefly, that's how we've got our Alexandra Road Park back in working order. And it's very beautiful. You're very welcome to come and have a look. One of you, I think it was Galinda, said that she'd been open, Cressingham Gardens was open for open house, and we too will be open for open house. We've been open for a number of years now. And I have to say that I've been really inspired by listening to lots of people, and especially the Focus E15, because we have empty flats here. And, well, that's another story. So thanks, everyone. Bye.
Elizabeth, thank you very much for such a succinct and interesting story. Really good to finish, I think, the community stories with such a positive note. And I think also you've touched on some of the tools and resources that are available for groups. So I think that provides us with quite a nice segue now to explore maybe in a little bit more detail some of these tools and indeed the toolkit aspect of the book that Pablo and Daniel.
Does Elena have anything to add, maybe? Does Elena have anything to add? Elena, that is also from Alexander and Ainsworth Estates.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Sorry, I'll kind of No, I wouldn't have anything to add, but maybe if we have any question during, later, I'll be happy to kind of combine my replies with Elizabeth. I wasn't directly involved in the park, but as part of the case studies, there is also an additional narrative, which is how we are currently undergoing both the Better Homes kind of scheme and a restoration, kind of refurbishment of the heating system, which is quite complex. And that has put us in a position to having to learn quite a lot about procurement, quite a lot about engineering, and resource ourselves with a number of external help. But I can talk about it in the questions rather than now.
Okay, thanks very much, Eleanor. So let's continue then into the toolkit aspect of the book and some of the resources and tools available for community groups. And I'd like to bring on Sarah Sackman, if I can, to talk a little bit about the legal side of things. We've already had mention, I think, from Galinda and others about judicial reviews and some of the other legal aspects of their particular journeys. Sarah, are you there? And if so, can you please switch on your camera and your microphone?
Hi, Iqbal. Can you hear me? I think
Yes,
you've
I
got
can.
to turn on my video. I think you've got control over it.
Right. Okay. If I do,
Oh.
then right. Okay.
Oh, there we go. Can you see me?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much. Yep.
Well, first of all, I just want to say how inspiring it's been. The last hour has been absolutely brilliant to hear from so many different leaders from their communities and the struggles that they've been involved in and the successes that they've enjoyed and the community and solidarity that you've created through your campaigns. It's just been inspiring to hear about it. And I was really thrilled to be asked by Pablo and by Daniel to contribute a chapter on law and how law can form part of the campaigners' toolkit as part of their really excellent publication. Because as a number of people have mentioned today in recounting the history of their own campaigns, law, of course, is a critical resource in housing campaigns. It shapes the politics, the process, the policies of estate regeneration. And I think it's probably fair to say that access to legal knowledge, knowing your rights, access to legal advice and representation is access to power. Very often, as those who've been involved in these campaigns will know, the barriers to access to justice mirror a lot of the same barriers that communities find themselves in when they're trying to access resources, access housing, access a fair hearing from the public bodies which they're interacting with. And in that struggle, the law is a critical resource. And over the last 10 years or so, I've had the privilege of working with a number of different community groups, not just in London, but also outside of London, at various stages of the regeneration process. Sometimes that's been at the start of a process when community groups have encountered the early stages of plans to regenerate that estate, and they've wanted legal advice about how to engage in that process and put forward a community-led vision for regeneration. Often it comes at the blunt and sometimes brutal back end of a long and attritional process, which a number of people on tonight's panel have described, whereby communities are confronting demolition, planning permissions have been issued, master plans have been put forward, and the law and judicial review in particular becomes the instrument of last resort to resist and also to try and create the space to put forward an alternative vision of what regeneration can look like. So groups like the Fox Hill Estate, the 35% campaign down in Southwark, Stop Haringey Development Vehicle, the West Ken and Gibbs Green Estate, in fact. These are all groups that I've had the pleasure of working with. And the process of working with those groups as their legal advisor, as one of their legal representatives, has probably taught me as much as I hope that I've been able to help them. It's unquestionably the case, and I talk about this in the chapter in the book, that law is a blunt tool. It can be a very limited tool, but there's no doubt that in those two aspects that I describe in the book, one, knowing your rights and being able to navigate and understand the process, that knowledge of the law and the legal process and the planning process is absolutely critical to establishing a successful campaign. And second of all, the tool of judicial review, blunt though it may be, it can often be the only final available tool of resistance for some communities to litigate and challenge the decisions that have been taken about their homes, about their lives, but which people are objecting to. And one of the things that has surprised me about being a legal representative and advocate in many of these cases is the extent to which the law, as well as being a tool amongst many in a campaign, we've heard about the use of very creative use of humor, of sit-ins, of petitions, of emails. All of these are tools, and law is just another tool in the toolkit. Campaigns which forget that and put all their eggs in the legal basket are often campaigns which founder, but those which see law as an accompaniment and as a supplement to those other campaigning tools and telling their story are often the strongest campaigns. Having a very, very clear idea of what you want the law to help you achieve. A number of people on the call have mentioned the importance of bringing a legal challenge, not necessarily to change the decision maker's mind, which is very difficult to do, but to confront them with what the community's feelings are about a particular proposal for regeneration, to confront them in a court of law, and often to buy yourself time, to delay. A number of the judicial reviews that I've been involved with failed as legal claims, but in the case, for example, of Stop Haringey Development Vehicle or the West Ken and Gibbs Green judicial review that we brought, they bought the campaign's time to await political change and if you like, allow for the space in which winds started to blow the other way and to achieve some of the successes that we've been hearing about tonight. So a lot of the detail and if you like, the nuts and bolts of how to bring a judicial review, of how you can use lawyers, legal advisors as a resource in your campaigns, that's all in the book itself. But as I said, the thing that the experience of acting as a barrister in many of these campaigns has taught me is the extent to which law can supplement and help to create community and help to galvanize some of these campaigns. And the way that I've seen many of the residents that I've worked with organize, whether it's to fundraise, to publicize a court battle, to feed in their ideas, to prepare witness statements, to put before judges and planning inspectors, to let them, those people in power, see their estates, their homes, their communities from their perspectives is an enormously powerful way of telling the stories that we've been hearing tonight, and which, as I said, have been unbelievably inspiring. So I hope that what both the toolkit does and events like tonight do is help to foster the networks that we've been talking about, that we can all collaborate, educate one another, organise, because whilst the estates we've been hearing about tonight have largely had a London focus, I know that outside of London, in other big cities and not such big cities and towns, the same issues are coming up, and they don't necessarily have the rich resource and the rich network and tapestry of campaigners that that we have here. And so I hope that there are people on this call tonight. I hope that that message will get out further afield. And congratulations finally to Pablo and Daniel for the contribution they've made to that debate and to disseminating these brilliant stories.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed. Absolutely brilliant. You mentioned about spreading the word outside of London. It just so happens I'm actually in Bath in Oldfield Park, actually gazing towards Fox Hill at this very moment in time. What an interesting case study that is. And I think in terms of sort of demystifying the legal process and actually giving communities and individuals a sense of the powers that are potentially available to them, given the fact that actually a lot of groups and individuals often do feel very powerless and feel that the law quite often is a little bit sort of lopsided from their point of view. I think your explanation there about the judicial review process, and the wider legal mechanism, if you like, is very, very useful indeed. I think it's a very rare thing, I think, to get a planning lawyer and barrister actually contributing to a such a grounded piece of work like this. So many thanks indeed. If I could also just at this point, so before I turn to Daniel and to Pablo, just reiterate again, if you have any questions, and I think maybe Sarah there and of course everybody else who's spoken tonight surely have raised a few questions and points to discuss. If I can get you to send those in by chat or the question and answer box, so that will be hugely useful. So on to the very final part of the presentations tonight, or the panel discussions, I should say. Pablo, Sandra, and Daniel Fitzpatrick, the two authors of the book, and again, bringing forward the idea of the toolkit and perhaps providing some more sort of reflective comments about what they've learned in putting the book together. Pablo, perhaps I can turn to you first of all, and if I can ask you to switch your camera on and your microphone.
Yeah, thank you very much, Iqbal, for the introduction and for chairing this session. So first of all, great news to hear that West Kent and Gibbs Green has succeeded in the right to transfer. So the book features campaign that keep evolving, that are alive. So we keep having good news after the book is published. I wanted to give just a bit of background to the book, where it came from and what motivated us to write it. So the book is the output of a research project funded by the British Academy and the Leverhulme Trust that we've done. Daniel Fitzpatrick and I have done at the Bartlett School of Planning. It's been published with UCL Press and is open access. So if you Google community-led regeneration UCL Press, you can download it for free. And that's kind of like one of the key principles of the book, because it's a book that should be useful for both communities and planners that want to use it for for their own state, for a state they might be collaborating with. So it was very important to publish this book open access without any kind of paywall, and UCL Press provides this opportunity. And the research project itself has been done in collaboration with the JustPay network that we've heard today from Richard Lee and Michael Edwards. JustPay has been collaborating with UCL for many years, and both Daniel and I got to know JustPay through teaching in Elena's module that we will hear from Elena later. And it's been very important, their collaboration, for organizing workshops with communities and for having a closer connection with community groups, which has been essential for this project. So the motivation for this book is that it came from this moment of kind of like austerity and housing crisis, where many housing estates were facing demolition. I think one of the if we see, for example, the example of the Haygate Estate, even Elephant and Castle, with 1,200 social home lost and only replaced with like 70 or 80 social homes. It's quite striking what has been happening with social housing in London in particular and all across the UK. and also how residents have been displaced, some of them out of London and so on. But we also looked at this context of in the early 2010s, of the big society that was supposed to devolve power to communities and to and policies should kind of like enable community participation, but at the same time, communities were being ignored in this estate regeneration process, and despite they were opposing the demolition of their homes, like it happened, for example, in the Highgate estate, the councils were not listening. And then on the other hand, we started to observe all these creative responses to contest the demolition of social housing that were happening in different housing estates. And these creative responses also to propose, so not only to oppose demolition, but also to propose alternative schemes, in most cases through infill, in some cases different strategies. And we also saw that some community groups and residents were using formal planning tools, like we've seen today, like the right to transfer, the right to manage, or like in the cases of the Greater Carpenters that hasn't been here today, the neighborhood planning. But they were also using what we've called in this book informal practices from activism, that included things like sustained campaigning, organizing themselves, visiting the council offices, organizing demonstrations, organizing actually a people's plan that is not an official planning document, but is a document that provides a community vision and supports other formal strategies. So we created this project. The title of the research project was Community-Led Social Housing Regeneration Between the Formal and the Informal, because we wanted to explore this kind of tools, the formal planning tools and the informal planning tools, informal activism tools, or informal tools outside of planning that were being used by residents. So we selected these 7 case studies that provide some of the case studies that are campaigns that are ongoing, or campaigns that happened in the 90s, like in the case of Wedge. And through looking at these 7 case studies, I think you've listened to 5 of them today. We have looked at which are the most, which are those strategies that these groups have been using in order to create this toolkit that is free download, as I said, and that is a toolkit that can be transferred to share knowledge with other residents that might be facing the same situation, or to urban planners or architects that might be helping those residents to put together a community plan, a people's plan, a neighborhood plan, and so on, and even also to local authorities to work more in cooperation with their with the residents, and make the most actually of the social capital. I mean, one of the things that I observe, that we observe in the book, is that the councils have not made the most of all the not local knowledge that is on these housing estates. So one of the, just to pass it, before passing it to Daniel, some of the things that we observe in the book is this kind of like the powerful, how powerful it is to keeping a campaign for over 10 years together. I think that's kind of like a huge achievement of many of these campaigns. The fact that the campaigns have combined formal and informal tools of planning, I think have been very successful, as we discussed in the book. And then also, I think something that has been discussed today, which is the importance of networking between campaigns. There's a work that Just Space has done quite a lot, but I think that it has also happened during this project because we've organized a series of workshops, and even in the event today, where the different campaigners kind of like meet together and share their experiences, because I think it's important to connect all the different initiatives, and in fact all the different initiatives have been learning from each other. And we can see how many of these campaigns for like Cressingham and West Kent and Gate Dream, they've shared strategies to a certain extent. And also, I think it's useful for us as academics and urban planners that collaborate with community groups to take this knowledge and keep collaborating with community groups. For example, I'm currently collaborating with a community group in South Kilburn in putting together a community plan. And much of the, and this working on this book and looking at these 7 case studies have been very important to work with these residents in South Kilburn and put together a community plan with them. So I'm going to leave it now with Daniel to continue with the book, and then we'll keep answering questions.
Thanks, Pablo. At the risk of reiterating what Pablo's covered, I just wanted to really thank the groups that we worked with, and also the ones that weren't able to present, especially from Peach and Grape to Carpenters, but really all the speakers and many more, apart from the speakers, residents and activists. I'd like to thank Just Space as well for supporting this project. I think also for offering us spaces within their events, umbrella events, to create workshops to discuss policies around housing. And we had a series of workshops around discussing the housing strategy and the London plan. So that was also a space to connect, educate, and network. So I think for us, learning from this project, or certainly then an ambition for us, was to offer a different account or a different vision for what planning can be, and different visions for what for how planning is being used, and also, I suppose, find a way to challenge the division between academic university settings and community group forms of knowledge. And so I see this as a sort of project to find ways of bridging the sorts of knowledges that are created, especially in the sort of informal settings of community groups, residents fighting against demolition. We sort of divided up the formal and informal planning tools, but I think the sort of message is how in all these experiences there's a sort of a varied set of tools being used, and there's also this sort of long tradition in London which gets sometimes lost in time, and we forget the details of what campaigns have happened before. And I think I see this as almost a document of a current period, a current time, and how we could apply these tools also at different scales, maybe just also going beyond housing. But certainly the goal here is how can we create better provision for housing for residents. There's community ownership as a goal, as a sort of new way of imagining the provision of housing at a local level, by and for residents. But there's also sort of the ambition of greater control, of residents having a greater voice, having a greater say over the management and the ownership of their homes collectively. So we sort of, what was interesting, I think towards the end, we had a final wrap-up workshop, and I think what was interesting was the themes that emerged in this final workshop that we discussed were really around the financing of community-led regeneration, which is something which needs a lot of work on. There's obviously a lot of voluntarism goes into these projects, and people are activists out of necessity. So we also discussed the various forms of community organizing, knowledge exchange, and also something which emerged from the experiences both at Alexandra Road, issues around residents' control, not just of their housing, but of their energy, and that sort of linked to issues around fuel poverty as well. So I think the project will continue, and I hope that it's not just a static document, that it feeds into more campaigning. I've got great admiration for the tenacity of all the groups that we and all the individuals we talked to, contesting schemes and finding alternatives. Really, the idea of proposing against top-down solutions, but proposing alternatives, new visions, and in doing so, build up a real grassroots repository of knowledge, expertise, and valuing these forms of local planning knowledge as well. I suppose we're also aware of how the idea of community is difficult to manage. There's a lot of division that is created, especially between tenures, and there's also the micro politics of what's going on. So I don't think we idealize the difficulties. Communities can also sometimes be not progressive or exclusionary in some ways. So, but I think there's a lot of lessons here to learn about how we can build networks of knowledge, solidarity across different groups, across different forms of tenures and forms of housing activism. I think Focus C15 really, Saskia really touches on how there's different struggles going on, and this is a sort of, again, a space and opportunity to, like the slogan, educate, agitate, and organize. I suppose we were launching it and we didn't want to wait for post-pandemic, but times, because we're not really sure when that will happen. But for me, there's been a lot of reflection in these times about how, on one hand, we've seen a huge rise of mutual aid networks and forms of community organizing, even on a virtual level. But on the other hand, the sort of housing crisis faced by many is being exacerbated, and it feels like the solutions are not really particularly coming from the government, and not particularly positive. So I think this is, again, an ongoing conversation. We will probably face more austerity and same forms and same process of top-down regeneration. So I hope that these are visions that can help future organizing as well, and that we will continue to support each other in this endeavor.
Daniel, thank you very much indeed. If I can just maybe pause you there, because you've just hit on some territory that one of our audience would like to just explore very briefly, and that is how we do sort of move forward given where we are right now. So this is a question. I'm just going to read out a question from AD, which I assume is the initials rather than AD as in Adrian. But so thank you very much to all the speakers. And the question is, do we feel that COVID may present an opportunity for further housing reform due to the pressing needs for health and adequate living space? So I think we can say that's a general question about the impacts of COVID-19 on housing reform, sort of more broadly, and particularly in relation to estate regeneration. Daniel, seeing as you're there, do you have any quick thoughts on this before I pass it over to some of our other panelists? Daniel, sorry, you're going to need to unmute yourself. Daniel, I'm afraid you're still right. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah. This question is around post-pandemic hope. Is it?
Well, housing reform more generally. Yeah. Do you have any reflections on how things are going to maybe roll forward from now? If you don't, then I can.
On one hand, I feel incredibly positive, just because of my own personal experience in these times has been just witnessing this sort of explosion of mutual aid networks, and that gives me a lot of hope, and that could be tied to better support for community-led housing in its different guises. But my fear is basically that the sort of broader economic dimension of post-pandemic will really put screws on local authority funding, and so that's my big worry really around any possibility of housing reform. But so there's elements of hope and worry really. Yeah.
Pablo, do you have anything to add?
Well, I think one of the advantages of the lockdown period is that it has that we have spent more time in our neighborhoods. I mean, the fact that the lockdown in the UK allowed you to go to do kind of like 1 hour of exercise a day, it means that we've kind of like experienced our neighborhood more than in other times where normally kind of like go to work. And I think that that can provide us also, a bit more awareness of our local infrastructure, of our local public spaces, and of our local community in general, and also these networks of mutual aid that Daniel was mentioning that has taken place. So I see the hope more than in a housing reform that it comes a lot from the top down. I see a hope more on something that would come more from the bottom up, from more awareness of your local situation and your neighbors as well. So I see it from that point of view.
Okay, thank you very much. Saskia, maybe I could just ask you, because I think you also mentioned explicitly some of the issues that you were confronting, in relation to homelessness and housing issues, and of course, the plight of where E15 operates. Maybe you could offer a reflection on where we are at the moment and your experiences of COVID-19.
Yeah, we're at quite an interesting point, I guess, for want of a better word. In terms of like campaigning, Focus E15 has been really active almost immediately when lockdown was imposed, and we were active online, we were active in Zoom meetings, but that certainly has its limits, because actually at the heart of our campaign is being on the street essentially and meeting people on the street to fight for housing, and we can't do that right now. And when can we do that? And it's a very interesting question as well to talk about campaigning and to talk about democratic rights to campaign. And obviously some of the legislation that's been brought in as well, it's quite tough in terms of like your right to be on the street. And we have to say as well, everyone's watching what's happening with right-wing groups as well that are going out on the street and demanding their space. Now, we are explicitly left-wing, but we also want to be able to, at some point, return to the street in a safe and secure way. So we're at a really interesting point in discussing how we hold the council to account from afar online. And we've kind of reached the max point with that by, organising every single week and having an audience, but we're certainly going to be discussing actively kind of how we can step it up. I wanted to bring up just a quick thing in regards to the question on homelessness, because people may have seen that the Street Homelessness Fund, the government have just ended it. And so there's going to be a really significant moment that's going to come up quite soon where street homeless people who were rehoused in hotels and etc., they're going to be possibly moved en masse out onto the street potentially. And I think this is going to be a really significant moment, because something that certainly we learned from our campaign is if you do something to people all at once, then you've got possibly the start of a movement. When you pick people off singularly, it's very difficult. But when big things happen in one go, you can potentially have a movement. So I think that's going to be a really important thing in the next period, to see what's actually going to happen on that front with street homelessness. In terms of just general housing campaigning, everything's kind of stopped. The council's kind of stopped. And so it's a bit tricky on that front. And I don't know if I'm going to abuse my moment as well, just to flag up something I forgot about the law. That was a really interesting aspect about the law. And just to say that our campaign's got an ongoing massive legal complaint with the Public Interest Law Centre, who've been really helpful. And we're also being trained up by Law for Life, which I think everyone here can access, and you get some basic training on housing that's really good. But I hope that was useful.
Okay, thank you very much, Saskia. So maybe I can just turn to the next question then, from Bob Collover. So what lessons, if any, can be learned from what happened at the Robin Hood Gardens? I don't know who's best placed to answer that. I fancy that Eleanor Basusi might have something to say about this. Eleanor, do you fancy saying something about this?
I cannot show my screen, but actually I wasn't much involved in Robin Hood Gardens. I mean, I know that there was an effort. Someone has to use the screen because I can't use the screen. Okay. If you want, I cannot. Okay, start my video. Fantastic. To be fair, I'm not. I wasn't involved in Robin Hood. I know that there was a failed there was a series of attempts at listing the estate, which was one of the routes to save it. And in a way, that was partly why the estate that Elizabeth was talking about has had such a different route from others. And this brings in also the idea of how legal framework can help. This estate was listed and it has protected it from a number of potential, not just alteration, but in long terms also demolition. And I think that was the route taken in Robin Hood at the beginning. I know Daniel might know a bit more about that. But I think it demonstrates how sometimes there are quirky bifurcations that happen to these estates that takes them in a different direction.
Okay, Ella, thank you very much. Michael, would you like to add something? Michael Edwards.
I don't think I can add much on Robin Hood Gardens. I know the story, but so does everybody. But I don't know the people involved or the details of the struggles or anything. If Richard's here, he may know something about that, but I can't add a great deal.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. No problem
let
at
me
all.
just say personally, from a purely personal point of view, it seemed to me to be a wonderful estate. It looked pretty fearsome from the outside in a brutalist kind of way because of that enormous wall to keep the sound, like the sound barrier, away from whatever it was called, Poplar Road or something. But once you got inside, it was an incredibly secluded enclave with this hill in the middle and a lovely place in lots of ways. And I went down there a number of times with groups of students and met with tenants and talked to them, and it was a happy place on the whole, and people enjoyed it. It just had the misfortune to be too close to Canary Wharf. So it was sitting on a piece of land which had become potentially incredibly valuable. And with the prevailing orthodoxies of that period, it got swept away. And I guess it's still, the last bit will be gone soon. We've just got the wrong people in the room to tell that story in detail, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. I say something there?
Please do, Elizabeth.
That's interesting because one of the features about our park is 4.5 acres in the middle of very, very valuable land. And just the other day, I met someone in the park who said to me, "Oh, but we liked it before it was restored." And I said to them, "Look, it's 4.5 acres of valuable land. You have a helicopter up there buzzing over us and saying, oh, we could fit a lot of things in there. We've got to have it used. We've got to make it patent. And, it's for that sort of reason." And that was really behind a lot of things, behind what we were doing, to get it on the map again, so it wasn't jumped on.
Iqbal is muted. I have just one point about the Robin Hood experience, and it's not so much from, I don't know the details, but one starting point for our research was a report that an engineer at UCL, Sarah Bell, and her team and Just Space worked on, which was questioning the assumption that demolition is the first approach, really, and it's called demolition or refurbish. And I think, although I'm not personally like against demolition but we've seen that that's not the first approach or strategy, and this is something that we were sort of questioning throughout. And when we did our the consultation element in reply to the housing strategy and London plan, that we were sort of questioning that's the starting point often for regeneration is demolish. And there's not only social consequences, there's enormous environmental costs as well as economic costs. And there are alternatives that should be on the table and examined with just as much weight, and which do not cause such enormous social impact, as well as the environmental impact, the embodied energy, and etc. etc. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Dan. I don't know if anybody else has anything to say about the Robin Hood case, the Robin Hood Gardens case specifically.
Just one thing that is kind of related to Robin Hood Gardens, which is that in some occasions the strategy of listing an estate, I mean, has secured the state for the tenants, like in the case of Alexander Road, that has a majority of social housing tenants. But we can see, near Robin Hood Gardens in Poplar, how the Balfron Tower was listed, but then it was sold to a private developer. So there's also listing the shield of the building is not sufficient. I mean, I think the RBA pressured for Robin Hood Gardens to be listed, and a lot of professional architects and so on. But I think it's important to not just preserve the shield of the building, but also the essence of the building, which is social homes.
Thanks very much, Pablo. And just whilst you're there, I think let's just turn to now our final question. I am conscious that we have overrun by a few minutes, so thanks very much for all of you in the audience for hanging on. Let's just have a final question from one of our former students, Caitlin. Hello, Caitlin. Good to see that you're joining us this evening. And the question is, as a toolkit, as we've discussed tonight, what are we going to do with that in terms of teaching? So how could the toolkit be used in undergraduate programs specifically? Of course, I should just explain that we do have a very strong relationship in some of our master's programs with Just Space, and actually reaching out to various community groups, particularly involved with neighbourhood planning and other forms of community-led planning activity. But what about on the undergrad front? A little bit of a specific question, this, but Pablo and Daniel, any immediate thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that as you were saying, the postgraduate programs have a stronger relationship with Just Space from the Bartlett School of Planning, but also from the DPU and from geography. And undergraduate level, I think that the opportunities for undergraduate students for working with Just Space are through the Just Space volunteer or extracurricular activities, I think it's officially called, scheme that Michael Edwards normally has coordinated in the last few years, and also Richard Lee, where students have been collaborating, both undergraduate students and postgraduate students have been collaborating with Just Pace. I can recall, for example, that they collaborated in the neighborhood plan of Greater Carpenters neighborhood forum. They collaborated a lot also in all the process of the London plan, on replying the consultation of the London plan. And I can remember that there was a few undergraduate students that collaborated with that. I think that they might also have done some collaboration with the maybe Michael knows more about this, with the planning society, with the students planning society. But yeah, maybe I don't know, Daniel, you teach more in undergraduate than I do, so maybe you can.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to incorporate much more into the curriculum opportunities for both students to maybe around project work, for example. So I teach on a second year module, which is based around project work, and it would be really great to be able to, in the space on the constraints of a university term, even virtually, but being able to collaborate with and respond to the needs of community groups, for example. So that's one way that, and I've been looking a little bit at this in terms of how can people at university offer assistance in a way, or support to community groups, but on their terms as well. Like, what are the needs that community groups might have, and there's obviously like a negotiation there around clarity of briefs and clarity of needs, but it would be great to sort of create more bridges where we can offer support to community groups as part of the teaching, as part of the pedagogy that, you know, we're trying to create the future planners that perhaps see their career opportunities dwindle in the public sector and see only private sector job opportunities maybe, and I think even through this way of teaching, show them that planners play a greater role and play multiple roles. You know, you have a planner working in private sector, but you can also have a planner working within the community and performing a community organizing role, coming from a different tradition as well. So I think that's there's a planning tradition there, and there's an opportunity to support that education, but also find ways of supporting community groups.
Just on that note, I've also been running for the last 3 years a short course that is called Civic Design, that is being done in collaboration with community groups. I worked with 3 campaigns in North Kensington in the first year. Last year I was working in the South Kilburn Estate Regeneration, and from that course, the students started putting together the community plan for 2 tower blocks of South Kilburn, and using a lot of the tools that we've been discussing in the book, and that we've been working after the course for a year with them now. And this year we're again in South Kilburn, in this case, working to save 2 community spaces in the state. So there's a lot of, I mean, like that, Elena has been teaching with Just Pace for like around 6 years, and Just Pace have been developing modules, I think, in collaboration with students for 11 years. But many of them, as I was saying, are in postgraduate level. But this short course that I teach is available for both postgraduate and undergraduate students. Thank you very much, Pablo. And I think you know, a number of people have commented just on the comments there about, you know, what a useful and necessary collaboration this is, you know, between universities, organizations like Just Space, and the community groups themselves. So I think you and Daniel have really, you know, struck on something here, and you know, and I think there's some momentum now being built, and I think a really good time to really sort of energize you know, the effort that all of the panelists have been engaged with this evening. So it is 10 to 8. I am conscious that we have overrun a little bit. I think it was inevitable, but at this point in the evening, we would normally say, right, let's go and have a drink and discuss things informally. Sadly, it's not to be, so I think we're going to have drinks and networking in the comfort of our own homes tonight. But thank you all so much indeed for your contributions, and to the audience for putting up with a little bit of
quirkiness, shall we say, with the technology and Paw Patrol, you know, emergencies and all the rest of it. As just to reiterate, finally, the book is, of course, available to download for free from UCL Press. If you just go to the UCL Press website. And huge thanks to everybody. So I think that's it. I think we're done. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Iqbal.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.